The Nazi soldier felt it again, that unsettling sensation that someone was watching him. He scanned the dark street, his heart beating so loudly he could hear it. There was no one in sight, but that didn't reassure him. German soldiers and Dutch collaborators had been disappearing across town, executed one by a mysterious avenger. The mere thought of them sent a chill down his spine. He hurried toward his building, fingers trembling as he searched for his keys. When he heard it, the faint clatter of a bicycle, he turned, only to see two young girls. The smaller one, her hair neatly braided, couldn't have been older than 12. She smiled at the man as she reached into her basket and pulled out a pistol. It was near midnight. All day, Dutch General Henri Gerard Winkelmann and his colleagues had been going through maps and running war games. Still, the future of the Netherlands seemed all but certain. With a final sigh, Winkelmann stood and walked to the door, turning just before leaving to tell his men, quote, "Now the Germans can come. We've done what we could. I'm going home to catch some hours of sleep." Unfortunately for Winkelmann, he wouldn't get to rest for long. Just 4 hours later, the Nazis were already crossing the border. It was May 10th, 1940, and the Nazi invasion of the Netherlands had begun. The nation barely had the resources to defend itself. When studying the battleground, Hitler almost scoffed at them, assuring his commanders that it would take no more than a day before the Wehrmacht brought the Dutch to their knees. Winkelmann ordered the destruction of bridges leading deeper into the country and fortifying the lines of defense standing before the Nazis in Amsterdam. Some soldiers were also tasked with cutting down trees and telephone lines to make passage and communication near impossible for the Germans. It was a valiant effort, but in 1940, there were just a few armies on the planet strong enough to even dream of countering a Nazi invasion, and the Dutch were certainly not one of them. Soldiers could barely believe their eyes as the first German panzer trains began to roll into the battlefront. Many had never even seen a beast like this before, and for a moment, all they could do was turn to each other and ask, quote, "Does our army have these types of trains?" The incoming fire would silence the men before anyone could answer. In the end, Winkelmann could not save his nation from becoming the latest victim of the Nazi campaign. His only comfort was the fact that he could prove the Führer wrong, because for all his armed forces, he couldn't make the Netherlands fall in one day. It took him 7. With the Netherlands under his control, the Nazis proceeded to do what they did best: secure absolute control of the streets and purge the cities of the country of any sort of person they deemed undesirable. House by house, members of the SS would knock on doors with the butts of their rifles, shouting at the top of their lungs for anyone in the house to step out and identify themselves at once. These men were ruthless and would not ask permission to break down windows if they were not let in, coming into civilians' houses and wrecking every room as they searched for refugees they might be hiding inside. At the village of Schoten, now part of the city of Haarlem, in the western part of the nation, Freddie Oversteegen knew she didn't have too much time to act. Ever since Hitler had begun his purge across Europe, she and her 2 daughters had turned their home into a clandestine shelter for those who had been forced to flee from their home nations because of the Nazi persecution. But now, with the German soldiers at their doorstep, they had to figure out a way to get those people out of the country towards safety. The family was modest and didn't have many resources to support themselves, let alone the refugees. Still, they were sharp and courageous, unafraid to sneak them out whichever way they could, past checkpoints and German-controlled territory. But by now, the Nazis had made fleeing near impossible, and no matter how hard Trankia tried to get these people to the other side of the border, the Germans always seemed to be one step ahead, cutting down families as they attempted to escape under cover of night and deporting them to Germany, where the most cruel of fates awaited them. Trankia's heart broke every time she learned about yet another one of the refugees she'd sworn to protect being caught. But rather than giving up, she just doubled down. There was no way she would let the Nazis get away with it. And her daughters, barely 16 and 14 at the time, would not think twice about joining the fight against Hitler's minions as well. Freddie and Truus Oversteegen appeared like any other Dutch girls in the country, and when they biked past the Nazi guards patrolling the streets, Not a single soldier thought much of them. None of them imagined that behind those innocent faces, the two sisters were quietly plotting how to make each of them pay for the crimes they'd committed. They started small, carrying the illegal newspaper Truus, or The Faith, across the city. With one sister serving as lookout, the other would discreetly slip copies into the bags of unsuspecting passers-by. When these strangers reached home, they would have no idea where the paper had come from, but in its pages they could learn all about the atrocities and crimes the Germans were committing across Europe. At night, when Nazi patrols were not too near their street, their mother would cut out stencils for the girls for them to spread resistance messages across town. Their favorite targets were the propaganda posters urging Dutch men to relocate to Germany to support the Nazi war machine. With one swift motion, the sisters would pull out their stencils and paint over the notices before any soldier could even glance their way, writing, quote, "For every Dutch man working in Germany, a German man will go to the front." It was a dangerous game they were playing. If caught, their captors wouldn't ask questions, nor march them back home to their mother with a warning. With every newspaper they delivered, every message they painted, the sisters were gambling with their lives. Still, they carried on, and when German troops began their invasion of the Soviet Union, they were already marching toward the town of Helmstedt with a banner concealed inside their bag. Once there, the sisters looked around. There were no Germans in sight, but still, they had to act fast. They pulled out the banner with a pro-Russian tribute, rushing to put it on top of a fascist government billboard and running away before the next train arrived. For days, everyone in town talked about the banner, and although the Germans were furious, no one could tell who was responsible. Freddie and Truus Oversteegen couldn't be more pleased with themselves. They'd successfully managed to outsmart the Nazis. They had no idea that, as they carried out their mission, a man from afar was observing them closely. Freddie and Truus were at home with their mother when someone knocked on the door. The three women exchanged uneasy glances. No one was expecting any visitors. Rushing to hide any evidence of their mission, Trankia told her daughters to stay back and be alert as she opened the door. Standing there was a tall man in a fedora and long coat, his expression rigid and unreadable. From the other room, the sisters strained to get a glimpse of him. They'd never seen this man before. His solemn presence made their stomachs twist. This could be it, a member of the secret police, finally coming to arrest them. After exchanging a few words with their mother, which were too quiet for the girls to hear, the man stepped inside. Trankia turned toward the hallway and called for her daughters. The stranger wanted to have a word with them. In the living room, Freddie and Truus finally got a better look at the man. He was imposing for sure, yet he didn't carry the wolf-like gaze of the Nazi troops they'd learned to spot from a mile away. Before he could say a word, their mother excused herself and stepped out, leaving the girls alone with the stranger. His voice was calm and collected, yet as he began to speak, the sisters understood their lives were about to change forever. He was not a member of the German secret police. He was Franz von der Wiel, a well-known figure within the Dutch underground resistance. He admitted he'd been watching the girls for some time, and although their methods could still use some refining, he was convinced the sisters were some of the most impressive young operatives he'd ever encountered. His proposal was straightforward. He was assembling the Haarlem Council of Resistance, a team tasked with fighting back against the Nazis, and he wanted Freddie and Truus to join them. This would be a top-secret unit of only 7 people. The sisters could never reveal the specifics of their missions to a living soul, not even to their mother. Before agreeing, von der Wiel issued them a warning. If they accepted, they would no longer be limited to delivering illegal newspapers and painting anti-Nazi messages over walls. They would have to fully commit to the fight, laying dynamite under bridges, sabotaging railways, and even learning how to handle a gun. He left no room for ambiguity, asking the sisters, quote, "Do you think you could shoot someone?" For a moment, the sisters hesitated. Then Truus, the older one, lifted her chin and declared she could shoot, quote, "a real fascist, a swine who takes people from their homes to have them executed." From that moment on, these 2 girls would become some of the youngest Nazi hunters in the Netherlands. Being a formal member of the Dutch resistance meant that any day could be your last. Around the same time Freddie and Truus were carrying out their first missions, the girls got word of a young man by the name of Karl Groger. Seeking to stand up against the regime that had targeted his Jewish parents, Karl had joined the rebels and destroyed an address registration office in Amsterdam. The hit was a success, but during the attack, Karl's cover had been blown, leaving him no option but to run away, seeking shelter in a nearby farm until other members of the resistance could arrive to help him escape. But once the German police were on your trail, it was nearly impossible to outrun them forever. And before any allies could reach Karl's hiding place, he was already being dragged out by the Nazis. The last words he would write to his parents before being executed were, quote, "Lovely mother, lovely father, I will be killed tomorrow. I really had to act like this. Above all, I refused to feel hate or revenge." Freddie and Truus knew this could easily be their fate. Still, every day they got on their bikes and headed out, carrying secret messages and weapons for members of the resistance, slipping past German checkpoints undetected. Whenever possible, they also escorted refugees and small Jewish children being transported by the resistance across enemy lines until they could get them to a safe hiding spot. However, not long after joining the resistance, the sisters were assigned to a far more daring mission, sneaking close enough to a Nazi warehouse to start a fire. Taking full advantage of their harmless facade, the girls approached the building naturally, carrying the materials for the attack in baskets or hidden beneath their clothes. Once again, not one German soldier paid them any attention, not when they slipped past patrols, and not when they fled moments later, as the first traces of smoke began to emerge from the warehouse. However, with Nazi brutality escalating by the day, these sporadic attacks on German facilities were no longer enough. Soon, the sisters were tasked with neutralizing the targets that posed the greatest threat, whether German or Dutch. Decades after the war, Remy Decker, son of Freddie, revealed one of these missions. At the time, Freddie was somewhere between 15 and 16. She received word of a Dutch woman rumored to be giving the names of local Jews to the Germans. Freddie located the woman in a park and approached with a kind expression, asking for her name. Once the woman confirmed she was indeed the traitor the resistance sought, Freddie acted instantly, pulling out a gun and taking her out on the spot before fleeing the scene. It was a brutal line of work, but Freddie and Truus saw it as the only way to give their nation a fighting chance against the Nazis. As Nazi soldiers and Dutch collaborators began dropping like flies across town, German troops were placed on high alert, tightening their checkpoints and scrutinizing every unfamiliar face. Yet even then, no one suspected the Oversteegen sisters. With their hair neatly braided, they looked like innocent Dutch schoolgirls, quiet, shy, barely raising their eyes as they walked past Nazi patrols. In reality, they were calculating every detail, studying troop placements, memorizing faces, tracking patterns and shifts. Whenever they spotted a lone soldier peeling away from his unit to return to whatever apartment he'd stolen from a Dutch civilian, the sisters were already on the move. And once they were, there was no man who could call himself safe. With the same innocence that protected them in public, the girls moved silently behind their target, following him for blocks. Only when he reached his door would he hear the faint crunch of footsteps behind him. By the time he turned, it was already over. Freddie and Truus had drawn the pistols hidden in their bicycle baskets and cut him down before he could utter a single word. But not every mission allowed the luxury of shadowing a target. Some of their so-called liquidations demanded a swift hit-and-run. In those moments, Truus would pedal the bicycle with everything she had, while Freddie sat behind her, gripping the pistol with steady hands. As soon as they spotted the target ahead, Truus accelerated. Freddie raised her weapon, and in a single controlled burst, she emptied her ammunition into the collaborator. Before nearby troops could process what had happened, the sisters were already gone. These missions were never easy, but to them, it was the only way to fight back. Years later, Truus explained, quote, "While I was biking, I saw Germans picking up innocent people from the streets, putting them against a wall and shooting them. I was forced to watch, which aroused such an enormous anger in me, such a disgust, the feeling of dirty bastards." She recalled a particular time when a Dutch SS soldier was beating a defenseless civilian in broad daylight. Quote, "I shot that guy, right there and then. That wasn't an assignment, but I don't regret it." but by far, the riskiest method required meeting their targets face to face and earning their trust. The plan always began at night. The sisters made their way to a local bar where German soldiers and Dutch collaborators gathered to drink after a day of terrorizing civilians. Freddie would remain outside as a lookout, while Truus slipped in, scanning the room for a man naive or drunk enough to fall for her trap. She approached him casually, showering him with compliments about his looks and pristine uniform, until he believed, without a shadow of a doubt, that this young Dutch girl was utterly enamored with him. Once she had him hooked, she leaned in and whispered an invitation. Join her in the woods for some privacy. With a foolish grin, the man agreed at once, stumbling out beside her as his comrades cheered. Truus guided him deeper into the trees, her voice still soft, still flattering. Only when the man heard movement in the darkness did he stop smiling. His eyes darted around, just in time to glimpse a resistance fighter emerging from the shadows to deliver the fatal shot. Once the man collapsed, all that was left was for Freddie and Truus to roll his body into a ditch they had dug beforehand. By now, the sisters had become some of the most efficient Nazi hunters in the entire country. However, even for them, there were limits to how far they would go, and soon they'd be given a mission that would put those boundaries to the test. Arthur Seyss-Inquart was one of the most hated Nazis in the Netherlands. From the moment Germany occupied the country, he was appointed Reichskommissar, the Reich Commissioner within the nation, quickly becoming one of the chief architects behind the terrorization, exploitation, and deportation of Dutch civilians. The underground resistance desperately wanted him to pay for his crimes. Yet surrounded at all times by an impenetrable wall of Nazi guards, Seyss-Inquart was untouchable. His family, however, was another story. Resistance leaders kept close surveillance on his spouse and his 3 young children. Commanders believed that the only way to strike at the Reichskommissar was to kidnap them, though what exactly they intended to do afterward remains unclear even today. For Freddie and Truus, the idea was unthinkable. Yes, they had targeted countless Nazi soldiers and collaborators by this point, but turning their weapons on children who had done nothing was a line they would not cross. When commanders presented the mission, the sisters stood firm, answering, quote, "Resistance fighters do not take out children. We only fight against real fascists, not their children." It became one of the few missions they ever refused, and for a brief moment, the sisters questioned whether they still had what it took to serve the resistance. Their refusal had cost the underground movement a potential advantage over one of the most powerful Nazis in the country. Yet deep down, they knew that in war, one could not afford to forget all humanity, or else they would risk becoming the very monster they set out to defeat. This was not a campaign they would win by increasing the ruthlessness of their tactics, but by perfecting their strategy, and fortunately for them, they just met the one person who would elevate their fight to an entirely new level. The Nazis called her the girl with the red hair. Her real name was Hannie Schaft. She was a 22-year-old woman who, even before the Germans seized control of the Netherlands, had shown an unwavering push to defend the innocent. She enrolled in university to study human rights law, yet dropped out the moment she was ordered to pledge loyalty to the Nazi occupiers. Her fiery determination and relentless drive to stand against the Germans did not go unnoticed. By 1943, she joined the resistance, working alongside Freddie and Truus to sabotage Nazi operations throughout the city. Many of her missions were unrecorded, and even today, countless details are still hidden. However, it is known that on multiple occasions, she participated in tactical executions of Nazi soldiers, operations she carried out alongside one or both of the Oversteegen sisters. Sometimes, Hannie would disguise herself as an older woman, wrapped in a heavy fur coat, glasses perched on her nose, a bag at her side, likely carrying her weapons. Beside her walked Truus, dressed convincingly as a man in a long trench coat and newsboy cap. From a distance, they looked like any local couple, perhaps even sympathetic to the occupiers. Yet the moment a German soldier let his guard down, the 2 resistance fighters closed in, striking before he even understood what was happening. Freddie, Truus, and Hannie became a lethal trio. Journalist Sophie Poldermans, who knew Truus before her passing in 2016, has stated, quote, "Hannie was the intellectual. Truus was their decisive, down-to-earth leader, and the feminine and fierce Freddie would map out their missions." Together, They eliminated more Nazis and collaborators than any of them would ever publicly admit. Even decades after the war, whenever someone asked for a number, the answer was always the same, quote, "You shouldn't ask a soldier how many people he shot." Their efficiency became so notorious that Hitler himself took notice, ordering their immediate capture and execution. But despite years of secret missions, German forces were no closer to catching them. Their only lead was Hanni's unmistakable red hair, seen in a flash by some soldiers just moments before another Nazi fell. By early 1945, spirits were high across the Netherlands, especially within the resistance. After years of risking everything, they were finally seeing the results of their work take shape. Allied forces were smashing through the last German defenses guarding the country's borders. With morale collapsing and manpower dwindling, the Nazis stationed in Dutch cities were weak, barely able to maintain control of the population. Now it was only a matter of waiting before the Reich cracked and the Netherlands was free again. For Freddie and Truus, now 19 and 21, it was a relief. For the last couple of years, they had sacrificed any hope of a normal teenage life to hunt Nazis. But with liberation finally approaching, they believed they might soon be able to set their guns aside and return to the quiet, ordinary life they'd once dreamed of. However, before they could celebrate, the sisters received grim news. At a checkpoint in the city, a German guard had stopped a dark-haired woman. There was nothing outwardly unusual about her, yet something didn't sit right with the guards. It was almost as if they'd seen her before. They demanded to check her papers. Everything appeared to be in order, until they looked more closely. Beneath the black dye, faint red roots were beginning to show in her scalp. They had found Hanni Schaft. Although by this stage of the war, the Germans had, at least in principle, agreed to halt executions, Freddie and Truus knew better. The Nazis would never pass up the chance to take revenge on one of the most wanted women in the country. If they didn't act now, they would never see their friend again. Disguised as a nurse, Truus made her way to a local detention center where captured resistance members were usually taken. Forcing calm into her voice, she approached the guards and demanded to see Hanni immediately, claiming she'd been sent to conduct a medical examination. The guards were unconvinced. They couldn't be certain she was a resistance member attempting a rescue, but they sensed something was off and refused her entry. Truus kept insisting, her voice trembling as her desperation grew, repeating that the examination was urgent, that she needed to see the prisoner now. Eventually, whether touched by her determination or simply wanting her gone, the guards told her she was wasting her time. Hanni wasn't there. She'd already been transferred to another detention center in Amsterdam. There was no way for Freddie or Truus to reach her in time. Her execution took place on April 17th, 1945. It's said that when the Nazis fired, the first bullets barely grazed her. She looked at her executioners and delivered her final words, quote, "I shoot better." The next round of fire, however, did not miss. The war in Europe ended 3 weeks later. After the war, Freddie and Truus slowly returned to their lives, but the scars of those years never fully left them. According to friends and family, even decades after the fighting had ended, both sisters were tormented by nightmares that would jolt them awake, screaming in the dark. Remy Decker, Freddie's son, recalled that when he was young, he was reading a history book about a Dutch girl with red hair. When his mother looked at the book, she began to weep. She told her young son that the girl in those pages had once been her closest friend, until the Germans captured her, and she never came home again. Freddie would always struggle with the fact that she and her sister had survived while Hanni hadn't. Yet neither sister allowed wartime shadows to take over them. Instead, they devoted themselves to speaking at schools and universities, reminding new generations of the cost of silence and the necessity of resistance. Through the National Hanni Schaft Foundation, named after the girl with the red hair, they worked tirelessly to ensure that the cruelty they lived through would never be repeated, and that no child would ever have to be tasked again with fighting against soldiers taking over their city.